What's going on, world? Welcome to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Joined today with me is family. So this year, I'm a distinguish between special guests and family. And what makes family is somebody that we've been in intimate spaces as far as um working closely together and making change happen. Like it may be a teacher, it may be someone that we're making change in the same impact. And I always try to highlight these individuals because I can vouch for them. You know, you meet a lot of people, you can't vouch that their heart is in the right place. So special guests will be people that I kind of like what they're doing, but I don't really know them. But family would be like, you know what? No, I know that they heart in the space. You can introduce yourself because I don't like to mess up people's stuff, but give them whatever you want to tell them.
All right.
Tasnim Sulaiman.
What's up, little brother? Yes, we are definitely family. I am Tasnim Sulaiman. Everybody calls me Taz. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm also the founder and executive director of Blackman Hill, which is why Reg is family because Reg works with us at Blackman Hill as well. He's been on my top about an interview, acting like I didn't want to do his interview, and I'm like, we talk 5 times a day, like.
I had to get Taz on because if y'all remember it's almost 3 years, it'll be 3 years in October. She was on an earlier episode on the podcast, talking about Black Man Hill, which is why we're a family. Like she said, she's the founder. If y'all want to go back and listen to that episode. But I told her, I'm like, Taz, I don't know anything about you before Black Man Hill. And I heard her on a few other podcasts. I want to give him a shout out, Taz. What was the fella's names? Or
Let's talk, bruh.
Let's Talk, Bruh. That was
Yeah.
the main one. That I was
Oh,
listening
okay,
to
okay.
Let's Talk, Bruh, and I had to get them on here, so y'all be seeing them soon. But um, I was listening. I'm like, I never knew any of this thing in this conversation right now.
I
But I
know.
was happy to listen to it because now it opened the door for me to ask her some questions. So before the life before BMH, what got you into wanting to help people in the first place?
That's a good question. I think I always kind of was a therapist, but way before I was a therapist. I initially thought I wanted to go to law school when I was in undergrad. Like I didn't know what I wanted to declare. So I was actually a communications major, and I really just didn't know what I wanted to declare. Even though I finally just declared communication because I needed to do something. But what I really liked about the communication courses was like like differences between men and women communication. It was more like the psychology of communication. Now that I think back on it. And then I'm minored in sociology, and I was going to go to actually law school. I was trying to figure out what I
Oh
wanted to
wow.
do. And I was just so unsure. And I went to therapy actually. At the college center, you go to the therapist center. So
Hmm.
I went to the therapist center, and we were talking about it, and he had me take like one of those career assessment inventory tests, and you like strong interest inventory. You can pop them up online if anybody's watching this is unsure. They got like free versions, but I took like a real extensive one because the college had paid for it. And when I was done, the 5 results, they had 5 results. The 5 results was like nurse, social worker, counselor, therapist, psychologist. I looked at that and I was like, 4 out of the 5 is the same thing. And I knew I didn't want to do no nurse because I don't like, gross stuff. I don't like blood and stuff like that. So I was like, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, I had never thought about that as a career, but I was like, that actually makes so much sense to
Hmm.
the point where like so later after I became a therapist, I would run into I went to a wedding once, ran into somebody I went to like middle school with, and like say somebody you haven't seen in years. I'm like, oh hey, what you do? They ask me what I do, whatever. I tell them what I do. Like I've had two. This happened to me like 2 times. Both people that knew me from like 13, 14, they was like, that makes so much sense. They was like, yo, that has always been you. And I was like, really? And they both told me stories. Like, yeah, because one time you said something to me and I've thought about it all these years. It was like a monumental shift. Like you saying this to me. I'm like, first of all, you remember that? I would have no memories of it. So clearly I was along the right path. I think I was just always like, a helper. I do like being in the helping field, and I like helping people. So I think that's just always a part of who I was ultimately. So I went to grad school for counseling, and I knew it was the right fit. And thank God because I was only 22 22. I mean, with maybe 21, between 21 and 23 or something like that. So I'm glad I figured it out early. You know, a lot of people might not like. I might have went. If I would have went to law school, I think I still would have ended up back as a therapist, but I'd have been like 35 and like
Mm,
felt like I had wasted all this
early
time. And
20s.
yeah, so I feel blessed that I actually figured out my career path at such a young age.
Yeah, and you helped me or still helping me decide because like I we kind of had the same like idea of it. And I'm like, all right, Taz, I study communications in college, but I'm in this quote
Right.
unquote mental health space. So I'm like, they telling me that they can help me finish my degree. I'm deciding if I should finish in communications or if I should go into like a mental health one of like
Yeah.
counseling or things like that. She was like, well, I got my degree in community. I'm like,
You were
no.
like, "No, I didn't." Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm like trying to help you figure out your path too, and yeah, and I'm excited about your path as well. I mean, I know this ain't about you, but I'm excited about your path.
Nah, I appreciate it,
Mhm.
and some of the same things that what you were saying about career assessment. I just took one last year, and they were saying like mental health and counseling and things like that. And so I'm like, and that's when I brought it to you, like, hey, look, this is what they said, or whatever the case may be. But so you went to grad school and got counseling, but after that, you did more learning. I know.
Yeah, so all right, so I finished grad school in '05, and my first job I was working at Children's Crisis Treatment Center, working with children and families. And I just really did not like it very much. That's also like in that nonprofit mental health sector where they literally like you're scheduled with like 40 clients a week. There's a 50% no show rate.
Mm,
They schedule you with 40 clients a week because they hoping that you get 20.
mm,
And it just turns into like all of this paperwork and like also I didn't like working with kids was like it just felt like the parents were dropping off little Johnny, like, or I pick him up in an hour fixed. I'm like, I don't think it worked like that. Like little Johnny ain't got control over nothing, right? And so
mm,
I started realizing working with kids, it felt like working from like the outside and because I just felt like kids, even though I think kids make changes easier than adults, the adults were the ones who I felt like really needed to understand something differently or do something differently in order to get better results in parenting or with the kids.
mm,
So I was like kind of interested in relationships actually. So I did so from '05. To be honest, I just was telling this story last night. To be honest, I've only put like after like all my schooling, I've only put 4 years into the working world. So from '05, I finished my master's. From '05 to '09, I worked in the 9 to 5 world. Hated
mhm.
it. Hated it beyond belief. I just knew that it wasn't for me. I've always known that I was an entrepreneur. I hated somebody telling me what time I had to be to work. I hated sitting there. I hated people like having to follow like the structure or the rules. Even like I'm not the type of person that like to do stuff that don't make no damn sense. I'd be like, that
Mm.
don't make no damn sense. Like just just giving just stupid work. Um, but so I did, I worked in outpatient for a while. Then I worked in the schools. I worked in school-based programs, school-based behavioral health program.
Mm,
And during that time I was in CCTC. What happened was the way that I like ended up going back, like everything will come together. So then I knew that I wanted to work with couples. And then I got interested in sex therapy.
mm,
And how I got interested in sex therapy was I went to one of my sister-in-law had like one of those like in-home toy parties. I
mm.
went to one of those type of parties and it was fun. And I was like, oh wow, I had such a good time. And the girl, like, I was like, oh, this is like fun. Like on a weekend, you could like hang out with girls and women and
Mhm,
talk about products and and the products was amazing. So I
mm,
was like, oh wow. I was just very interested in that. So I started doing that like on my weekends and evenings. So
mm.
like I had the full-time job as like I was like the child therapist by day, child and family
And
therapist by day. Then nighttime I've always I told you I'm always been an entrepreneur. So I was always
right.
hustling. Then by nighttime, I was a mobile therapist. I would get
Mhm,
off of that job, go do mobile therapy, go into the homes. And then on the weekends, nights and weekends, I would host these in-home sex toy parties. And I did that for about 7, 8 years. And that I just got a lot out of that because I started recognizing a lot of the women at the parties. I made mine kind of therapeutic, like more psychoeducational. I was like, I really want to teach the woman something. So I just did a lot of self study around like women and sex and sexuality and their bodies. And And I learned at the parties that a lot of the women like struggled with having orgasms, even women that had been in relationships for like 10 years. And so I really just kind of sought out to try to help. I was like, whether they buy something from me or not, by the time they leave this party, they're going to learn more about their body. They're going to learn more about their sexuality. They're going to have a better, more enhanced sex life was my goal. And so my client, the customers used to refer me to, for other parties as like, oh yeah, I know this lady that could do your party. She's a therapist. Like, so they kind of coined me the sex therapy lady, right?
Wow.
And I was just like, oh, I kind of like the sound of that. At the time, I don't even think I knew that sex therapy was actually a thing. But
Hmm.
when I started looking it up and researching it, I was like, oh, I could get like certified in this, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of how it happened. I went to counsel for relationships. When did I start counsel? I think I started counsel in 2010 or 2011. I went to counsel. Well, first of all, I quit my job at 2009. I bought a house because I was like, it's hard to like get a house when you want to be an entrepreneur. I bought a house in 2009. As soon as I bought the house, I was like, I'm out. Like, I will hustle forever because that's the other thing. Doing the parties on the weekends, I recognize I would do one or two parties on the weekend. I'm like, I'm bringing home the same amount as my check.
Okay.
That after 2 weeks after taxes taken out, I was like, oh, this is not it. So I quit my job after I got the house, and then had been like doing like I have been a like contractor ever since,
Hmm.
doing behavior specialist work. I've worked with kids with autism, so I feel like I've done almost every realm of the system. I used to work with juvenile offenders, and I did that for a while.
See, I didn't even know that part. Like, you
Yeah, I
worked with
forgot about
juvenile
that.
offenders?
Yeah, I worked with juvenile offenders actually before I got my master's. While I was going through grad school, I worked with juvenile offenders. I forgot about that. Yeah, and I worked in psych hospitals before. I feel like almost every aspect of this field I have done it, except drug and alcohol. Like that's the one. Like I feel like that's like the one area that I haven't really like kind of scratched the surface with drug and alcohol.
No, that so you said a lot in there, and that I want to break down into different parts. Like, and the one that I know caught the listeners' attention was probably the sex therapist part of it. What's the connection between sex therapy and mental health?
Well, there's a connection as far as like, okay, like, because sex is a really healthy, thing that people engage in, right? And it's a sign of connection, it's a sign of all of these things being in alignment with your body or with somebody, a connection with your partner. Intimacy is important. So when that's affected, like when people are in relationship, and intimacy is really the only thing that differentiates a romantic relationship from a friendship, if you think about it, right?
Mm,
So if that is suffering and that is not no longer present, that is decreasing the quality, overall quality of the relationship for the partners.
mm,
And anytime your quality or happiness decreases, that is going to affect your mental health.
mm,
Especially for men, if you think about it, for men, like, especially if, imagine if your identity, is caught up in your ability to perform sexually. So then what happens when, you lose your interest or desire? So that's a big part of it. That's how it affects mental health.
okay, and it's so I know it's a lot of the times where couples can't have certain conversations. How would and I try to give like free gems that people wouldn't get in the
Mhm.
therapy office. So this might be clipped up again and used again, so that way it can
Yeah.
offer advice and help people. How do couples initiate that conversation about like sex? Or what tools do you give to them, or did when you were in that space give to them to
Mhm.
get to that, have that conversation of intimacy issues or anything like that?
Wait. Repeat the question. What's the question again? What
Basically, in the
tool?
simplest form of what tools do you give the couples who are struggling with like sex conversations?
Well, it depends on what the issue is sexually,
Mm-hmm.
because like for different sexual issues, there might be different tools. Like for example, like I'm working with a couple now, and their issues is that the woman has less desire. They've been married 20 years, and
Mm,
woman has less desire than the man, which is not always the case, by the way. I think a lot of times people always assume it's the woman with low desire. I've had several cases over the years in which the man is the one less interested in sex for various reasons. Um, but the first thing as a sex therapist is you're trying to figure out what is the source of the problem. So it is kind of like a puzzle. Like, does it come from the relationship? Because sometimes when the relationship, sex therapy and couples therapy kind of goes to me, it's like the perfect marriage because the relationship tells you a lot about the sex and the sex tells you a lot about the relationship.
Mm,
So if they're coming, I'm trying to figure out whether or not the sexual issue, is it a physical issue? Sometimes it could be like medications, or that could be a way that you're assessing mental health, because I didn't even mention that. Like, I forgot about that. I'm sorry. When you asked me that question, depression and anxiety can affect your sexuality too, very
mm,
much so. And the medications, psychotropic medications might affect sexuality, or blood pressure medications can affect sexuality. So it's like trying to assess whether or not it's physical, whether or not it's relational. It could be environmental. Environmental, an example of that could be like right now, it's pandemic. Imagine you stuck in the house all day long, 24/7
mhm.
with the kids. How you gonna get it in? And these damn kids is everywhere. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you're like, yo, I'm never getting no space for my partner. Like, I don't even
Mm,
want to see them no more. I'm seeing way too much of them in the element. So that can
mm,
be like an environmental example too. And also I assess for like family of origin history, or like how they learned about sex or sexuality, or any type of past sexual abuse.
mm,
Um, so there's different things. Like one time I had a patient who was like getting over breast cancer, and there was a link between breast cancer and declining sex drive, and then also children. Like,
mm,
so because women and men are just so different sexually. So if I'm seeing like a heterosexual couple, then I'm assessing for like the ages of the kids and things like that, because like the first year after women have a baby, if somebody comes in that first year, it's just like, just come back after like a year, because your sex life just gonna be shot. I wish people would just tell you that. Like, if you have a baby, that first year is not, you're not necessarily having sex therapy issues. You're just new parents, and that
mm,
first year is adapting, and
mm,
the woman is still trying to get her body back, and
mm.
so that happens a lot also.
I can speak from experience that that is true. What helped me in our relationship was that I understood what you just said. I
Hmm.
almost thought of myself as like, yo, that would be corny to leave a woman after she just have a baby. You get what I mean? Like, that's like corny. If you was gonna stop, then you should have stopped before that. Like, but that's a
Right.
whole different conversation in itself. The juveniles. You said you work with
Or
juveniles,
juvenile offenders, yep.
juvenile offenders. What was that experience like? Like, how did you? Well, you said how you ended up there, but like, what was that whole ordeal?
That was interesting. I think about some of them boys sometimes. They was like between the ages of like 13 and 17, or 13 and 18, or something like that. And I would go. They had caught some type of case, and they were on in-home detention. But I
Mm,
got so close with my boys. Like, I would go pick up, like if I'm assigned like 3 or 4 or 5 of them, I take them out, go into the community, and take them to do different things a couple times a week. It's like a way of, because they have in-home detention, like trying to keep them off the streets. Like, they send what was my role? I can't even. I was something, some type of advocate. I can't remember. Juvenile advocate. Yes, I was a juvenile advocate, and take them out into the community. And of course, I worked with some girls, but I did prefer working with boys more so than I worked with girls. But there was a couple kids that I got really super close to, like and I've kind of like watched. I've watched so many kids when I think I feel old. When I think about all the kids I have watched grown up, like, oh, I knew you way back when. But I got so attached to them. Some of the kids, it was two of the kids that I worked with though, like ended up later like committing a murder, and like are in jail, like
mm,
and that was hard. Like one of them I remember like trying to keep in touch with for a little bit and doing writing and stuff like that. And then like sometimes they would have a baby, they send me pictures and stuff. That was so long ago, but yeah, so that's what it was. It was like kind of really just like going out, like being like a mentor, like being like somebody who's have a positive influence in their life, and taking them out to do activities.
that's probably gonna return with that experience
Right.
to BMH. We that's coming soon
Oh
again.
yeah, 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 yeah. See, look, I know.
See.
Look, that's me thinking about programming. Yeah.
But what were some of the mental health struggles that you seen with some of them that you can, you could identify just spending time with them, not because you didn't counsel them, right?
No, not really. I mean,
Okay,
not technically. I think I counsel everybody. Like,
right.
People be like, you ain't my damn therapist. You ain't gonna tell me. You ain't gonna be trying to tell like, everybody call me and stuff. So not technically, but yeah, I
Mhm,
definitely will like talk to them a lot
mhm.
and give them advice about things and with their families and the parents and stuff. So yeah, I definitely have talked to them about a lot of different things if they were struggling with things. So yeah, I do kind of feel like I was an informal therapist, but not technically. It was before I became a therapist.
What what were some of the common things that they were struggling with that you could see, like, man, if you was in the therapy office with me, I could help you with X, Y, and Z?
That's a good question. They were all, I mean, these kids were all young, like living in like poverty, like
Mhm,
dealing with family issues. Like they all had trauma, they all had layers of trauma, they come from trauma, they
mhm,
come from, a lot of them was, I think I used to work North Philly, and did I used to work West Philly? I think most of my kids was in North Philly, that I had. So a lot of them had, like, come from situations with drug and alcohol, like parents. A lot of it was like family stressors. And a lot of the boys obviously were like they had started like selling drugs, or like they got caught for fighting. Some of them used to be really like good kids, like, two parents in the household. I remember this one kid that was so good. He was so sweet. Two parents in a household, parent, dad's a firefighter or whatever, and then they get caught up, like they get caught up in the other kids they hanging out with, so they in a fight. So they had
mhm,
drug charges, they had, aggression charges, they had, like weapon charges and things like that. The girls would have like fighting charges or stealing theft.
mhm,
That was so whatever it was that they would have gotten arrested for. So
mhm,
those are some of the things that they were going through. And if you think about it, it's like some of the same things that black men deal with also from the same neighborhoods, right? Like if you from a certain neighborhood and that's how you are surviving, that's how you
mhm.
that's almost like camaraderie. If like some of the kids that would get caught up with the other kids and talking to the parents, it'd be like, you're not even that
Like that.
kid, but my
Mhm,
homies are. So it's
mhm,
kind of hard to stand against the pack when,
mhm.
but I'm gonna just go to school and be straight laced, or like, if something going on, like, yeah, I'm gonna be corny if I don't like try something, right? So, kids just, made a lot of mistakes often. Yeah.
Yeah, and I correlate to that so well because I never considered myself like a bad kid or ever did too much like street things, if
Mhm.
any. But I caught myself doing that to survive, almost like being
Right,
within
right,
the pack.
right,
Like if you're not like that, with even sometimes of how I dress, you got to be within the pack or that you're not going to get accepted. And
right, right.
so I understand that so well. But
Mhm.
and one of the other things you talked about was in the psych ward and your work experience in there. um
I hated
I've
that.
never heard a good story from the psych ward.
Yeah, I hated that. Like that was a job that I just really did not like, being a psych
Hmm.
tech. Because I mean, when people are like literally like that's like people that are like 302 or staying at a hospital for a while, and like, like you have to get trained on like restraint. I hate all the types of jobs in which you gotta train on like holding somebody down. Like number
Hmm.
one, I don't want to get hurt, and two, like
Hmm.
I just don't. That's just I'm not comfortable with that at all. So like, I used to work at Fairmount Behavioral Health, and sometimes they put me with the kids, or sometimes they put me with the adults. So a lot of them, like if they were a danger to themselves or others, they need like a one-on-one, and you got to be within like a certain amount of I don't remember what the exact amount of feet was from them. So a lot of times it was kind of like just being with them. Like it's like if you're like their one-on-one, like you got to sit this close so that if
Hmm.
anything happens, if they're a danger to themselves, somebody else. But yeah, that was not a job that I really liked very much. But it was also interesting that like just regular normal people, like, it's not like full of crazy people the way people might think sometimes, that
Hmm.
somebody could just have a regular job and live in their day-to-day life and have a breakdown and end up
Hmm.
there for a week or two. You know what I mean? Like just so sometimes you would just see people, or you would see people, you were like, oh, is that so and so from around the way? So
Right.
but yeah, like that was not one of my favorite jobs actually.
What are some changes from, if what you can remember? Because again, I had a few people on the podcast that I have yet to hear one good experience about being in the psych ward. What are some of the things that if that you see could be changed about it? Like how could they improve on how they deal with like people that have been 302'd or, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good question. I mean, that's a question. I've been thinking about like emergency services, how it's
Mm,
so little. I think sometimes, people need more than just that, right? Like,
mm,
what it is like most of them have short stays, and I just went through this with my nephew recently who was had to go, to a crisis center or whatever, and he was really spiraling out of control, right? Like becoming a danger to himself and the others. And but when you go to the psych ward, it's like, like you have you're seen and assessed by a psychiatrist. One of the things and then they determine like whether or not you're going to stay. Normally they keep you from a couple days to maybe a couple weeks, but those are not like long-term residential facilities. Some
mm,
of the patients need more long-term because they would just leave, come back, leave, come back, leave, come back. Clearly there's something else missing. So I
going
think
on.
there needs to be more resources, that like something else to like refer out to. Sometimes it is social workers and stuff there too that would like help with, trying to find different programs and things like that for them to refer out to. Because sometimes if like that just happened with my nephew, he just got out of a hospital and they referred him to a program, a residential program where they're going to help him like sign up and get all his benefits and go to his appointments, because basically his executive functioning skills are not working, right? Like
Mm,
he has to get stable, and a lot of the stuff, even though he's in his 20s, like he can't do those things on his own. um
mm,
so like they just refer him to a program like that. So I think that, but also it's very hard. I understand HIPAA and the laws of HIPAA, but we just went through this with my nephew too. um the family will know a lot about the mental health issue. Like the person who is having a mental illness or mental breakdown will go in there and be like, "Oh, I'm fine,"
mm,
and like they're going by what they say. And if they're calm when they see him, like they might only give him 2 days. Whereas
mm,
like sometimes we're like, yeah, but like we've been like let me tell you, he's been homeless, he's been this, like the family have all the rundown. But unless that person gives consent for the family to talk, for you to talk to the family, like they can't even tell you if they're there. So my
mm,
nephew listened for like 2 days, and we was like paranoid about it. Like we was checking all the hospitals, the regular hospitals, and calling the crisis hospitals. Regular hospitals, if you be like, hey, do you have like a John Doe, like you're describing somebody? Because people end up in a hospital, and the hospital might not know who they are if they
right.
just found them like, unconscious. The hospitals can give you that information. Like, do you have a client that fits this description? We went down the Temple and had to like show a picture to the security guard. They can give it to you, but the crisis hospitals, they can't. They like, we
Mm,
can't give you any of that information. So kind of find out my nephew was missing all that time. We did a police report, all of this, but the crisis hospitals can't give us any information. We had to wait for days to not know where he was at. We had to wait for days before finally, I guess he gave. They called my sister finally because this, my nephew like gave consent to it. So
mm,
if somebody is not in their right state of mind, they also can't be the executor over their life, or
mm,
those choices, because sometimes they might be like, no, f my family, I'm not gonna call you.
right.
Right? We out here started police reports. We going to hospital to hospital to hospital because the crisis centers can't give you the information. So I think that's something that needs to be changed. Like to help families take care of people with mental health, it should be similar to regular health. How come the regular hospitals can tell us, we're not asking you about the treatment. We're just like,
It's
this is
they
a missing
there.
person. Because
Yes.
don't even get me started, because the police wasn't doing much either. Um, but yeah, so that's what I would say that they need that.
No, and it ties right into one of the other questions that I was going to ask you as well, with more so about crisis teams going out with police in mental health situations. And I know there's been big talk that police can't handle these situations. They're not qualified as far as like the trainings that they get, and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the thoughts that I have been having around that is the fact of putting that person, like a psychiatrist, in danger, or a social person in danger, or anybody that has the capabilities. I'm thinking about their lives at stake as well. As much as they can support, like,
Yeah.
wouldn't that make them in a vulnerable position to get hurt as well?
You mean the mobile, like a mobile crisis team?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could, but I do think a mobile crisis team is definitely way more trained, and the type of psych or mental illness issues you might be dealing with. They're going to be more trained in de-escalation because they don't
Mm,
have weapons. You know what I
right.
mean? and they train you with the, so like I think like if it's a call and somebody has a weapon, that makes sense that like, yeah, you might need mobile crisis team, might also need the police there, right?
Right.
Because they might not be able to do that. But if somebody doesn't have a weapon, remember what I was telling you, at those psych hospitals and things like that, they do train you on how to physically restrain people
Right.
without hurting them.
Mm,
So the police scene, well, as we learned yesterday, the police can show a lot of restraint when the police
mm-hmm.
want to show restraint, but police systems are not really trained in how to de-escalate. It's like their only go-to sometimes is to go for lethal force.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that needs to change for sure. Like the mobile crisis team, more mobile crisis support here in the city. I think it's just so hard, and there's so much of mental illness. There's a lot of people who are in jail because they're mentally ill, not necessarily because they're criminals. But where else they gonna go, right?
Right.
Because their mental illness is also leading to them committing a crime. That happened with my nephew too. He sat in jail for like 8 months too, but we have been trying to get him help. At one point, he was sleeping on trains. Like we have been trying to get him help, but eventually, yeah, like it leads to people with mental illness. They're going to end up in some type of system, right? They're going to end up in
Mm,
the jail system or like the homeless system. You know, like they're going to end up somewhere, and it's like, unless they have the support that they need. And it's hard to also help people with mental health issues or mental illness, severe mental illness, because once you turn 14, you're your own executor. Like if you're like, no, I don't want to do that treatment, you can sign yourself out of treatment, right?
mm,
And there's really nothing the family can do. So for a long time, the reason why it was hard to help my nephew is because he was like, there's nothing wrong. He finally just now got to the point when he was like, oh yeah, like he got his schizoaffective and he got his diagnosis. He finally just now is accepting it and complying with the medications and like doing what he has to do. But that it's taken years to get to that point. So thank God
wow.
he's still here. Some other people, like if they still fighting or resisting the idea of mental illness, and that comes with, I think, the stigma and things like that. And I get it. It's really hard to accept a lot that you might be dealing with when whatever's going on for you and internally, it feels like it makes sense, or like it
Mm,
feels like it's normal. But my nephew, yeah, he was just having a really a very hard time. I mean, thankfully right now he's doing okay, and he's safe, but it has caused me to think a lot about the system, because this also happened like what, like a couple weeks after the Walter Wallace shooting here
mm,
locally, is when we were like, my nephew like had tried to kill himself, and so I was like, yo, that could have been him.
mm,
Like that really could have been him, because my nephew had a knife and was trying to hurt himself too. And luckily, my mom was able to talk him down, and she did call the police, and they didn't come, like, they came in a calm way,
mm,
and was trying to help the situation and not try to agitate it. But he also didn't have a weapon by the time they got there. You
mm.
know what I'm saying? So things like that where, it's just hard. Like was they can't control what's happening in their brain chemistry, especially if they're hearing voices and things like that.
Mm.
So it's just really hard because certain mental illnesses really do require being on medications, severe
No,
mental illnesses. Yeah.
no, that I understand completely. I remember how much it was affecting you during that time when everything was happening,
Yeah.
and still having to like be over here with Blackman Hill and go through like, and
Right,
you was like, yo, I just been off the grid, so I know how much what you were going through with your nephew meant to you in that moment.
right,
Uh,
right. So right
Um,
now things are okay. Thank God.
yes, yes, yeah. He's stable, I'm guessing.
He's not stable, but he has the support he needs in
Okay,
order to be on the path to stable. So
okay.
yeah.
No, that's salute to him for having that. Speaking of systems, and at an early age, you said 14, with your what, it wasn't with your nephew, but at 14, like you can be your own advocate, basically your own executive. You said you worked in the school system as well.
Yeah.
um I don't even know what the real question is, but we know that the school system and mental health has not had the best relationship. Like they take the therapist out to school, or if the therapist, not even a therapist, it's more of a counselor. If the counselor is in the school, they may got 4 or 5 schools that they may be working with. Um, what changes or things that you think can happen within the school system in regards to like mental health?
Um, when I worked in the school, I actually didn't work for the school system. Like I worked for Children's Crisis Treatment Center, and so there were contracts between the school systems and some of these community mental health agencies where they're sending a mental health agency is based within the school.
Mm,
And so, and actually, I do think that that was a very good type of program because it's additional support. Um, like the schools we were at also had school therapists, school counselors, but they work for the district, whereas we work for a community mental health agency.
mm,
And certain kids, like if they had a what do you call the was it an IEP? Like if they had a diagnosis or like an IEP or and they needed additional support, like because they might have had like certain like level one or they would go through certain like levels of behaviors.
mm,
They would assign them CCTC. Like I was the therapists, and then we also had behavioral health workers that would like travel with the kid or like spend certain time with the kid in class. Like they would basically like a one-on-one
mm,
because the behaviors would be so severe. So I thought that that was good because I think it was a good way of partnering with the schools, and one that like you could combine two different resources. Like I think like bringing two resources together to kind of like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
mm,
So I think that that was good, but I think also they need to start teaching about mental health and mental wellness and self-care in schools. And a lot of us don't. I don't think they teach about mental health. Like
mm,
now the schools have done a lot more. Like since Michelle Obama, there was a lot more initiative on health and nutrition,
mm,
and the importance of exercise and things like that, which is super dope because that's important. But I wish that people would start understanding that mental health is just as prevalent as physical health, and that they go together, and that one can affect the other. Because
mm,
this year, specifically with the pandemic, like all of us therapists, like we are overwhelmed, like burnt out because everybody had to like sit still all this time, and the
mm.
calls. I think somebody called me from Google and told me the amount of people searching for a therapist had increased 130%
Wow.
during pandemic. So yeah, and that's what like everybody, even my personal friends, be like, a therapist. I'd be like, we all full. Like everybody I know is full too. Like I don't know what to tell you, right? But so clearly we also need more therapists. And that's the other thing I wish that they would do in schools, like more like mental health education, mindfulness in the schools. Some schools have adopted this in some sports programs, mindfulness, teaching kids self-regulation skills. Just like
Mm,
you got to teach kids life skills. But like there's some schools like Quaker schools and stuff like that, like Green Street Friends, like they're teaching kids how to like, all right, when you feeling like, like just taking these moments, these mindful moments and breathing and things like that, you could start teaching kids self-care techniques and strategies so that you can start helping them with self-regulation when they get agitated or when they get triggered or like when there's a behavioral issue. So I think that that's something they can implement into the schools.
no, that I think that's phenomenal, and I haven't told you yet, but I want to write a children's book as well, like one of my next books, but I want it to be on mental health and teaching children like mental health and things like that.
Oh,
But
that would be
I
so
didn't want
cool.
to do it by myself. Like I wanted somebody, that's been around that can give
Yeah,
more
well, let's do
information.
it. All right, bro.
So,
You might have to
but
cut that out because somebody might watch that and then still our
they
idea.
won't
Like,
do it like me. But that's where
I never lied.
I
Yes,
wanted I
all
wanted
the
to get
time.
her on record saying that she'll help me do it so that
Yeah, no, I think that would be so dope. Yeah, no, I definitely would love to be a part of that. That would be
yes.
dope.
So we're coming up on the end. I know she got some stuff to do. It's hard. I told y'all she done gave everybody an interview but me, and then we
Well,
talk.
you kept saying you're going to. I was like, Reg, we talk so many times a day. Yes, the answer is yes. Just when do you want me to show up?
You know what it is? I think because I know how busy your schedule is that I
Right.
try not to bother you. Whereas other people that I'm not as close or working with, I'm like, all
You
right, well, you got to make that at least an hour with like.
Yeah, but I mean, family is a different thing, Reg. Like you family, so like definitely would have been done the interview. I mean, anytime you want me to do a topic or something like that, yeah, you got me. You just gotta, yeah, just hit me up and we schedule it, and then we good.
All right. My last, I think it'll be last two questions. We got to talk about BMH, of course, even though we ain't talk about it or touch on it. But I figured we'd leave off with that. But to get that whole other things that played a part into BMH being created and being where it's at today, um, communication and mental health. That was something that I told you that I started off with, and now that I'm in the mental health space, I'm like trying to correlate the two. how are you able to correlate the two, or how much has communication impacted your work within the mental health field?
I think a lot because just learning how to, I mean, communication is one of those most important skills, I think, when it comes to building relationships. And, a big part of being a therapist for me is like being a good therapist is about building a relationship in which
Mm,
somebody is going to feel safe and comfortable and non-judged and unconditional positive regard and all those things. So I think communication correlates to relationship building. Like, the way you say things, the tone of the way you say things, your nonverbals is even a big part of communication. There's cultural aspects of communication where, and you know that we put a lot of emphasis of the relationship building in Blackman Hill,
mm,
making sure like, because we're trying to get Black men to come to therapy and understand the importance and the value of it.
mm,
And so one of the ways in which we do that, or that we're successful in doing that, is because we put so much emphasis on the relationships that they're going to have with their therapists, and even with King's Corner with the groups we do. We put a lot of time and effort into designing them topics for them and getting the right host, and evaluating that, like being like, how did the men respond to that? Like, and we listen
mm,
to the men, right? We listen to what it is that they need or what they want, and we give it to them, like, because we want them to have positive experiences. It's very rare to none that a lot of people like may have been like, oh yeah, I tried therapy before, it wasn't a good fit. That does not happen with Blackman Hill. It doesn't happen because we make sure it doesn't happen. Like we put so much, we designed the whole program around matching them up, making sure that they're going to immediately start and have good communication with their therapist. They're going to have something in common. They're going to feel seen. They're going to feel like, oh damn, how did they know? Like, oh, he's a veteran, I'm a veteran. Like, so
mm.
we get so much information to be able to make sure that the men have a great relationship, and that's what I love about it. And we're doing it well because right now we got like 97, 98% effective matchup rate, which is dope. And 75% of our men continue on with the sessions even after the 8 free sessions are done. 75% of them are continuing on, which is extra dope. I think that number is going to increase too. That means
Mhm,
that we're getting it right, because if it's not free anymore and now they paying for it, that means
mhm,
that they really value that relationship. So
mhm.
that's super dope. That makes me so proud.
It's similar to like a Netflix or Stars, and you get that free trial, and then
Yeah.
after the free
Yeah,
trial, it was so
yeah, that's
good,
about it.
and
Yes.
you
Give
stay
them a
on.
little free, like give them a free thing, but you gotta make sure that free thing, like you're gonna have
Mhm,
all the banging movies during the time
mhm,
on the free part. Yeah. So then they want to say, yeah.
mm,
And that's great because we like to, it's not just about the sessions we give them, but we want men to commit to themselves. It's really about them committing to themselves and understanding the importance of mental health. Um, they may not have understood the importance of it before they started. We do an exit interview with the men, and some of the questions we asked on the exit interview was like, on a scale from 1 to 5, how important did you feel like therapy was before you started the sessions? And then we asked them, okay, now that the sessions is over, how important it is. And what we notice is that that number increases significantly. Like, like they might have rated something low, but after their sessions, we ask them certain questions, or how likely, how committed you were to your mental health, how likely you would have been to talk to other men about therapy before therapy versus after your 8 sessions. And those numbers always go up. Afterwards, they closer to the 4 or 5. So it's
mhm,
showing that by giving them the 8 free sessions, and making sure that they have a good experience, a good matchup. And that's why they have a good experience, is because they have the right therapist for them. Like we kind of know the best therapist for them better than they know.
mm,
We're getting it better than if they were to be calling by themselves, because the average person who's never tried therapy don't really even know what they're looking for. They don't really know how, just because somebody's Black doesn't mean that they are the best fit for you, right? We pay attention to personality and all that. So yeah, what we doing is well, you already know, but what we're doing is super magical. Nobody else is doing it like we doing it. I think that Blackman Hill is going to change the face, like force the bigger mental health system to change, because our numbers, remember, we also have like a 95, 96% show rate. Remember the last time I worked in, I was telling you, when I worked in outpatient before, it was a 50% no show rate.
mhm,
Imagine. right? Those be the programs that get all the money too, though. But imagine
Mm-hmm.
if Blackman Hill, if only 50% of the men that we do all this for showed up. Like after we go through all of our processes, yeah, like 96% of them are going to complete it. They're going to do all 8 sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we're just trying to build the program up because we got so many people interested in it. It's a wonderful program. It's a beautiful program. It is my baby, but it's really just not about me. I love what we're doing. I love the outcomes and the impact we're making. It's amazing.
I wanted to let y'all know, refer to her. I asked her about communication going into mental health, and she talked about Black Men Hill, which I was going to get to. But remember when I said in
Wow.
the beginning of the podcast,
It's
I
probably
said I know when somebody heart into it. So she was
yeah,
already ready to talk about it because that's she lives and breathes and eats Black Men
yes,
Hill.
it takes up
And so
all my schedule, all my life. But yeah, I mean, luckily I do love it because you can't work as much for something if you didn't love it. I would have a very miserable existence. But it's very motivating.
mhm.
It's inspiring. Like when we see the impact it's having on the men, when we hear from the men directly about the impact it's having on them, it makes me work harder and harder. So
No, it's the truth, and I'm witness to it because I was on the outside looking in, and I got to experience and go through it. And one of the things that BMH requires the clients and the men that go through the program is to become advocates
mhm,
and to be a proponent of like mental health and bringing in brothers and things like that. And so I attest that Black Men Hill is doing the job that it sets out to do, is the heal the community, man. Heal men, heal men.
absolutely, yeah.
and
Yeah.
we have King's Corner every Sunday at 7 p.m. We starting that back up. I don't know when this episode is gonna be out, but it'll be out. And you can come through with a brother and listen out on King's Corner and just get that fellowship, that bond between other men and have those conversations.
Mhm.
But again, she talked so much about Black Men Hill. I thank you for coming on today.
Oh, you're welcome. I do got one question for you. So now I'm gonna hit you with a question because
Flip it.
I am curious about like what you because I don't know if they know your backstory about how you started. We met because you were in the very first cohort when we first tested Black Men Hell out, the very first cohort of men that came through. And then fast forward to like a year later, like you're
Mhm.
like on the team and you're working with us. But I'm just curious about like, what you got out of it from your experiences like being a client, or like what do you get out of it, like your experience of like now being a part of the team.
No, that's a actually great question because as a client, it was everything she just said. I don't want to repeat it because that's exactly what it was. I remember when, and I don't know if you remember, Taz. I'm calling you like I'm
I
late,
remember. Yeah.
like, and she was like, "No, it's cool. I'm going to contact the therapist." Mind you, I hit her just random. I don't know if she was like in a therapy session or if she was with
Right.
her kid or whatever. I hit her at random, and she was like, "No, that's fine. I'm gonna call a therapist. I'm gonna make sure you can still go and everything is set up." She calls you like, "Hey, I confirmed." He said it's okay, still come, da da da. And I share that story because it's to show the level of commitment that um the mission is there for it. Slaving without getting paid, slaving without, spending time. She losing time with her daughter. And for me, the experience has been like phenomenal on both ends because and on one end I got to develop a mental health team that I tell people about.
Mm-hmm.
Blackman Hill gave me my first therapist, and unfortunately I probably should have continued with the therapist that I got through BMH, but that's when the car accident happened. It happened like
Right.
right
Right.
after. And
Yeah.
so I was doing physical therapy and going through all that, but they
Mm-hmm.
planted the seed for me to continue therapy. So you said the 95, you don't even know how many of those men that didn't go back still continue the therapeutic process. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
they just didn't continue with BMH, but they still continued it on their own.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, and unfortunately, my therapist retired. Basically, he just got out the game, so it wasn't even like personal to
Yeah.
BMH. He was like, all right, I wanted to do and be a part of it. Shout out to George, but
Yeah.
I say that being on the other side now, it was a seamless transition because when they would ask me what organization I was with and when I would go speak and do different things, I never had like a backing. It was like, no, I'm just Reg that want to speak. But when I say like with Black Men Hill, then everybody finds out. Like I just did a study the other day participating in this like research program, and I told them about Black Men Hill. It's like I wear the hoodie all the times, or the hoodies, or like you are a walking representation of healing
Right.
basically. And
Yeah.
if anyone look at the Black Men Hill logo, it's a man walking into healing. And so
Hmm.
I say all that to say that the experience and the ride keep continue to be a part of the mission is because of um the actual outcomes and like you said, the programs and the things that they're going to provide in there. And personally, and I'll answer it lastly at this, my number one goal is to win a Nobel Peace Prize, and I think Black Men Hill can be on the path, if not be the thing that helps me win that Nobel Peace Prize, because I feel like not that's my championship. You know how LeBron, they have their rings and things like that. If I make enough impact or do different things, I'll be able to get that Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, I think you with the right organization because impact is what we do. We don't do nothing less than that. If it ain't making impact, we ain't doing it. So that.
I feel like from your history alone, we just came up with like 3 or 4 new programs that we could put
I
out to.
know, right? Like, still go out, still, and the book, and the book. So
Yes.
we yeah, now we got plenty more work to do as if we didn't have enough already.
All
Right.
right, well, I'm gonna let you go. I'll put in the social media links actually, and I'm gonna put the personal social media links in there too, so
Oh
people
yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah. Because I know my page is like cobwebs right now. But
I'll
I'm gonna
put
try to
all
get back into it. Yeah.
I pull all that in. You guys can connect with her on there. You already know where to find BMH if you're following me, and how to get in contact with Black Men Hill. And remember that this podcast has never been about a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, whatever, and I'll see y'all on the next episode.
Thanks, Reg.